All right, I think we're good to get started. You're good on your side, Tina?
Yes, I am.
All right, we did our sound check, so it looks like everyone can mostly hear us, so thank you for letting us know. And good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar on building growth-minded teams with executive education and in partnership with the Association for Corporate Growth Edmonton. My name is Laura Bennett, and I am a program advisor with executive education here at the University of Alberta School of Business. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us here. Just to start, we have a few quick housekeeping items to mention. So first of all, the session will be recorded and we'll send this out to all registered participants following the webinar. At the end of the webinar, you will have an opportunity to ask any questions that may have come up during the session just by typing them into the chat box. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions before our time is up today. And finally, if after watching this webinar, you'd like to learn more from our instructor, Tina, which I'm sure you will, we will let you know what upcoming sessions she will be teaching.
Or not.
Or no, definitely yes.
Okay.
So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our instructor, Tina Mathas. Tina has 25 plus years as a leader, innovator, and entrepreneur. Her depth and breadth range from working with corporate multinationals to startups across the globe. In addition to her multifaceted background, she is also an experienced neuro leadership and team coach and facilitator, design thinking, lean startup, and agile practitioner. This experience combined with her love for creative expression are the key ingredients that make her a sought-after growth and performance coach. Developing high-performing, highly integrated, and connected teams are her areas of expertise. And Tina has worked with organizations such as United Airlines, Service Alberta, Smart Technologies, Husky Energy, Synovus, ATB Financial, and IBM Canada, just to name a few of many. So thank you for joining us, Tina. I will let you take it over from here because you all certainly did not come to hear me talk today.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everybody. I am going to try my best to put a whole bunch of information into a short period of time. Please feel free to ask questions through the chat as we go along. And then we will give you some time at the end of this to address some of the questions. Most of the questions that I don't get to address, I will do respond back to you after the webinar. So please go ahead and ask questions as we go along through the chat, and Laura will be monitoring that. How we're going to sort of separate the webinar today is I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on the concept of growth mindset culture, and then we're going to go into what that looks like in practical terms with teams. Okay. So I love this quote by Carol Dweck. A lot of the work that you're going to hear about today is based on her research as well as the work that she's done with the Neuro Leadership Institute. I'm also going to touch on work done by Team Coaching International, of which I'm a certified coach and whom I work with a lot as well as some of Dr. Gottman's research on relationships. So we will provide links to that as well when we send out this content to you all. The interesting part about what Carol figured out when she started this journey on growth mindset, and the reason why I actually got into her work 6 years ago, was around trying to figure out how my child was learning and how his genius would adapt to an environment that wasn't conducive for his type of learning. And she started sort of in the same direction as well. Her thoughts in this was that as she observed children, she, in her mind, she thought that, you know, when we are faced with difficulties, that we either step back, right, or engage with the difficulties. Her observation was a starting contrast between how kids reacted to difficulties. She always thought that people could or could not cope with failure. Yet amongst these kids, some loved it. So the insight that she had into why some of the children got excited about difficult problems while others got anxious was that she observed that some children believed that people were born with a finite amount of intelligence, okay, fixed mindset, and that can't be changed, right? Whereas others thought that intelligence was malleable and can be grown and nurtured through practice, okay? So that was sort of her aha moment, and she started to work with that and then expand her research into organizations. And from my experience, it's easier, I'd say, to grow by acquisition than it is to grow organically within an organization. Part of growing organically within an organization is helping teams move themselves between fixed and growth mindset. So we're going to get into that a little bit more in the next slide. So what is growth mindset? We'll start with what fixed mindset is. And fixed mindset is, like I said earlier, is this limiting belief that we have the knowledge that we already have and that we can't acquire anymore. So some of the concepts that come up around this is that we believe that failure is the limit of our abilities. We are, either good at it or not, right? We don't like to be challenged. We either can do it or we can't. Our potential is predetermined. When we're frustrated, we give up. Feedback and criticism are taken personally, and we tend to stick to what we know. Okay. Growth mindset, on the other hand, so in other words, fixed mindset is about being good. And I'll touch on some examples around that in a second. Growth mindset is more about being better, right? That failure is an opportunity to grow. We can learn and do anything we want. We are challenged, and challenges help us grow. Feedback is constructive, right? We like to try new things. We are inspired by the success of others. The main difference between these two is one, in terms of fixed mindset, is looking outward, whereas growth mindset is looking inward. Okay. Fixed mindset is how traditional organizations are set up. They set up a sales force. The sales force of a traditional organization is a great example. They're set up to compete against each other within the organization. They set targets, and they believe that these are the targets they need to go after. And they're very fixed in that mindset in terms of how they're going to go after those targets. Whereas growth-minded organizations pay their salespeople well and give them the opportunity to grow in terms of they get to choose how they're going to achieve the common objective or the common sales target, which forces them to become very uncomfortable, but curious, and allows them to figure out how to collaborate together to achieve a common goal. Okay. Growth mindset is a journey. Okay. It is, and I want to make sure that I illustrate this, is that we need both. We need both fixed and growth mindset, and we need to learn when to shift between the two. Fixed mindset, as I said, is characterized traditionally by the pressure to perform. Okay. It's typically doing more with less, right? So reduced attention to resources, to address mistakes. There's a weaker learning culture in fixed mindset. There's an avoidance culture, avoidance of challenges, avoidance of challenging experiences, and increased vulnerability when it comes to setbacks, right? A fixed mindset culture is all about proving I'm the best, proving I can achieve these results, demonstrating that I have the skills of doing that and performing better than others, right? So like I said, outward focus. Growth mindset is about improving. So growth mindset is about improving. It's about developing new skills constantly. It's a continuous learning environment. It's about performing better than you did before. So performing against your own development, right? So your own targets you set for yourself, as opposed to comparing yourself to others and performing against others. And it's very interesting because Carol asks this question, and I found it insightful. When do you feel the most smart? When you are flawless or when you are learning? And most of you will probably say when you are learning, I'm hoping. And that's when you are in growth mindset. From a neuroscience perspective, fixed mindset puts us into a threat response. You know, having to compete against others, having the pressure to perform puts us into a threat response. The part of our brain that is triggered then by that threat response is what we call our limbic brain. Our limbic brain is what engages the fight or flight response. Okay, so either attack or retreat. The challenge with that is that when we are engaged in that part of our brain is engaged, our thinking brain, what we call our prefrontal cortex, and I don't expect you guys to remember all of this, but our thinking brain goes offline. Okay, when we are in a reward response, you know, our limbic brain is calmed and our thinking brain is engaged. We're having aha moments, we're having insights, we're better able to deal with challenges that come our way because we're able to think clearly, right? So to give you an example, when you're in an argument with somebody and you walk away after the argument and you're like, dang it, I wish I'd remembered to say this. The reason why you weren't able to remember to say that is because you're working off what is already hardwired. You're reacting based on your limbic brain. So your limbic brain, the fight or flight, works off what is already hardwired. Whereas if you were able to ground yourself in that moment and access your thinking brain, you'd be able to have a more constructive conversation, or growth conversation. Okay? There's also this concept of false growth mindset. And false growth mindset is when we take what we already like about ourselves, right, and call it growth mindset. So being open-minded and flexible, for example, we can say, well, I'm open-minded and flexible, therefore I'm in a growth mindset. A lot of the startup companies that I work with, when they get to that point where they need to grow up, right, so they need to go beyond startup to scale up, they set themselves a sense of false growth mindset in that, well, we're a startup, we're already in growth mindset. Well, you can be fixed in that mindset, in that startup mode, and not be able to get yourself out of that sort of constant hero culture, firefighting, everybody does everything in order to grow up, right, and to go into that scale up. So you can be actually fixed in that mindset, even though you're telling yourself you're in a growth mindset, because you're a startup. Okay. So based on that knowledge, I'd like to do a little quick poll, and Jalal, if you're okay, or Laura, I'm not sure who's going to be running the poll. Get an indication of, is your organization or your team currently in fixed or growth mindset? So just select very quickly one of the two, either fixed or growth. We should be able to see the results right away. Oh, okay, cool. Half and half, almost. Okay. This is quite normal. So depending on the organization, like I said, we're teeter-tottering between fixed and growth mindset. A little bit more about the science around this, and I'm just going to close this poll now for everybody, is growth mindset catalyzes transformation. Okay. People with a growth mindset are more adaptable to recover from mistakes and begin again. Why? Because they believe that their intelligence can evolve through effort, right? So I think the bigger and more important part about this is to understand that growth mindset is really more focused on the process rather than the content. And we'll get into that in a second. So why growth mindset culture matters? There's 3 reasons why growth mindset culture matters. And what makes growth mindset real within organizations. So how do you develop growth mindset within organizations, or growth mindset culture? First one, according to the Neuro Leadership Institute, is setting priorities. And you know, in my experience, you can have goals, but without setting priorities in order to achieve those goals, and then creating the second piece, which is habits, habitualizing the effort, then you won't be able to actually get those goals achieved, right? The third thing is having systems in place. So what do we mean by this? Goals without priorities, one of the examples and habits I use is like methane coming out of a cow's butt, right? It goes into the never-ending atmosphere of nothingness, as opposed to harnessing that you know, methane and doing something with it. Priorities in organizations is really around consistency in messaging. It's around the leader actually campaigning and advocating for the growth mindset. So if I as a leader am not growing and challenging myself, I can't expect that my team will do that, right? So I have to emulate the behavior. I have to make myself uncomfortable. I have to put myself into situations as a leader where I am learning and growing, so that my team is emulating that behavior as well. So consistency in that, setting priorities. Habits are feedback conversations, right? And we're going to talk about that, because I think learning how to receive and give feedback using a coaching approach is one of the things that I focus on and identify with teams right at the get-go. You can't learn and have aha moments if you're not able to give constructive feedback. And we know that our brains don't like to receive or give feedback. So it's building that muscle through a coaching approach that's really important. And then systems is really more about creating the environment, a safe environment, to be able to challenge yourself, to be able to make it okay to fail, because through failure we have insights, and learning is all about insights. And so it's creating those systems that are in place, whether that's performance conversations, regular performance conversations, whether that is creating a way to engage the team on a regular basis through maybe it's through a chat type of environment, but it's not just the technology system, it's the system itself. A team is a system within a broader system. So creating a performance system where I'm meeting with you regularly as a team to get your feedback, we consider that a system. Okay, so having priorities and habits that get us in a safe environment within the cushioning of a system. The science behind this is that your mindset shapes the cognitive mechanisms or cognitive mechanics of how you deal with things, right? So your mindset affects how you respond to feedback and plays a major role in guiding your beliefs, the choices you make, and the goals that you pursue. Okay. So it creates resilience, and which is what we want to foster in teams. Okay. So moving on from that, how do we make this real? Why do teams exist? Teams exist to produce results. Any team that I work with, this is the first thing that I try and get them to have an awareness of, is that they are there as a system to produce results. Okay. High-performing teams don't happen by accident. I would argue that sometimes, most of the time they actually do happen by accident, but sustaining them is a deliberate process, and it starts with creating a continuous learning culture. So just to tie it back, why are we talking about growth mindset? Growth mindset is all about continuous learning, okay, and creating a continuous learning culture, okay? Because remember, we feel smart when we are being challenged and we're learning, right? So I call these the 5 guides, the 5 areas of focus. They are by no means conclusive. We're touching in a very short period of time some of the key areas that I tend to focus on and I think are important. I'm assuming in this case that we've already talked about culture, we've already defined culture, we've already defined purpose, which is very important, and we have a strategy. And so what I see as 5 key areas in terms of building growth-minded teams is baseline. First one is baseline. Assess where your team is in the moment. Okay, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then the second is you can't transform what you're not aware of, right? So becoming system aware, and that is the team as a system, right? So what are their performance attributes, their growth performance attributes? We'll talk about that in a second. And becoming self-aware, right? So you are, as a member of a team, the team, together each achieves more, right? Which is what team stands for. Each one of us is part of a team. So becoming self-aware about the language that you use, how you communicate, and painfully aware of your blind spots. And then educate. So learning through discomfort and insights, right? And habitualizing, right? I talk about sheep dipping a lot. Where I come from in the Southern Hemisphere, we dip our sheep once before we shear them so that we can get the ticks and fleas and gnats and stuff off their coats, and then once and done. And that's the challenge that I find with what we call HR interventions, or these one-day retreats that we take folks on, or education where we take you on, a 2-day training session and then leave you to your devices. I don't believe that growth happens without follow-up, and habitualizing the learning as a result. So a coaching approach is what helps you have insights on how to solve problems and hardwire what you've learned. We'll go into that in a few details. I'm going to spend the last few minutes here just going through some of the things that we focus on in terms of building growth mindsets in teams. Start with the baseline. So where is the team? What are the areas of focus that the team needs to improve on? The team assesses the team. It's not about assessing the individual. It's about the system assessing the system. Okay. And what I use and what I find really important in terms of growth mindset is assessing the team on their behaviors, right, as a system, not the individual behavior, because we have individual behavioral bias when we try and assess each person. Which is why I don't believe 360s work. But this is about the system assessing the system with positivity and productivity criteria. And we will go into those just very quickly in the next slide. But high-performing growth-minded teams are typically highly positive and productive teams. So that top right quadrant that you're seeing there, I'm just gonna, I don't know if this is in the way or not, but is this, top blue corner. It's a growth-minded corner of the quadrant, right? Let's get better. Low productivity, high positivity teams, which is the green side, is more about let's party. It's kind of the happy-go-lucky atmosphere, but not really producing a lot of results. Great camaraderie, not a lot of results. The red is your low positivity, high productivity teams. These are the teams that are sort of in transition. They're in let's survive mode, overwhelmed, very results focused, but not necessarily innovative. And then the bottom left, we say these are your low productivity, low positivity teams. And this is typically a team that's either being outsourced, it's a team that has a ton of uncertainty and disengaged, and usually want to get out of there. Okay. So the criteria that we look at in terms of growth is the 7 positivity criteria, which are trust, respect, camaraderie, communication, constructive interaction, valuing diversity of thinking on the team, optimism, and alignment. Okay. And then the productivity criteria, or the execution criteria for a team, are leadership. So team leadership, having the right resources, decision-making and how decision-making is approached, whether the team is proactive, how accountability sits with the team, and then goals and strategies. Okay. So what creating a baseline does is it helps us focus on where the growth areas need to be. In this case, if you look at this particular spider diagram, it shows that this particular team is having a challenge with decision making, with trust, and with constructive interaction and camaraderie. Okay. We know from a science perspective that positivity breeds productivity. So we would then look at these specific areas, and through using a coaching approach, have the team develop in these areas, but also have insights of their own on how to grow in these areas. Okay. The idea of being getting to 9, which is where ideally a high-performing team sits. One thing to consider here is that productivity, the competencies that support the team's ability to be productive, so in other words, what are the results that the team is achieving, is based on those 7 productivity criteria. And then, you know, what is the environment that supports effective collaboration for this team are the positivity criteria. Okay, so that was system aware. Now self-aware, and these are not done in linear form. This is all iterative in circular format. So we focus on a few aspects here, and I'll quickly go through these. Communication, we look at team toxins, blame, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt, and how we become self-aware of those and when they're happening, and we create some tools for the team to be able to practice when those come up and redirect conversations as a result. We focus on language. So when we're speaking in the system, either as leaders or as the team as a system, moving away from words like, using words like I and using more words like we that create inclusiveness. And then we identify blind spots within the system as well as within the individual, and help them become very self-aware with the support of the team, and work through those blind spots. We all have them, we have lots of them, and so we systematically work through those blind spots. And then lastly, we develop a culture of a coaching culture, right? And this is part of educating through habitualization using a coaching approach. Coaching helps facilitate insight, and I believe everybody in an organization should have the capability of coaching, right? So build the coaching muscle, because we learn through insight, through aha. And I had this said to me a long time ago, ideas are like children, we like our own the most. When we come up with the ideas ourselves, or at least perceived idea that we've come up with it ourselves, we are more likely to execute against it well, as opposed to when we are told. Our brains don't like to be told. So one of the mechanisms that we use, and if you want to do the group coaching afterwards, one of the key areas we will focus on is how to give and receive feedback using a coaching approach. This helps you build the coaching muscle, but also helps you help the other person and yourself have aha or learning moments around how to solve for problems and create growth mindset culture. Empathy and curiosity are the other key outputs of creating a coaching culture and building coaching muscle. Insight happens when we make ourselves vulnerable. In order to help create vulnerability, we have to have empathy and curiosity. So I think our time is up there. We have a minute left. We're going to go into just over to 12:05, if that works for everybody. If you're ready to get uncomfortable, I'm ready to answer some questions, and I'm going to hand it over to Laura for the question answer piece.
For sure. Thanks, Tina. Quickly before we get into questions, as I mentioned before, if you enjoyed this webinar and you want to see more of Tina, then we are offering 3 virtual coaching sessions around building growth-minded teams. So these 90-minute group coaching sessions will aim to enhance team performance through the receipt and delivery of group coaching, build confidence in coaching and being coached, and to apply group coaching as a tool for growth-minded, high-performing teams. So if you are interested in registering for this, then please type in the chat box, sign me up. Or if you wanted to wait until after, we will be sending out the email link and you can register through that. So we're definitely not done learning from Tina today. So I would like to move ahead and take some of the questions that we have while Tina's here and ready to share her insights. So I'm just gonna quickly go through a few that came a little earlier on. Tina, one of the questions was, growth mindset may also come with a risk-taking capability. How does one work on instilling a culture of risk and hence growth?
Okay, so I like to refer to it as risk management as opposed to risk mitigation. And how we do that is through a coaching approach, right? So having people be comfortable with having their own insights about how to solve problems helps them get comfortable with how to manage risk.
Awesome. I'm just looking in here. Give me a second, Tina. You'd mentioned that both mindsets are important. Mm-hmm. Can you provide an example when a fixed mindset is valuable?
So I use the example of, so fixed mindset is basically what you've already hardwired in your brain. Okay, it's recall, being able to recall what you have in your brain already. So when you're in an ER and you're working on a patient to get them back to normal, you don't want to be in a learning environment at that point, right? You want to be able to recall what is already there. Okay, a similar way, a much simpler example, for example, is when we're spending 15 minutes trying to figure out how to use conferencing equipment in a meeting, right? That takes away from our ability to be able to work on challenging problems. 15 minutes of the meeting is already gone. So in terms of what needs to be already hardwired and fixed, that is something that everybody should know and should be second nature, right? So that we have the ability to then focus on what it is that we were there in the meeting to do, right? So that's as simple as I can make it in terms of fixed versus growth mindset.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. I have time for a few more. Another question. What concrete steps can an individual realistically take while a part of a fixed mindset organization where one person is unable to change the system themselves but must still work and exist within it?
So speaking from a lot of experience in that space, you can only change what you are aware of. And I think it starts with self-awareness first. So think about what you have control over, but work on primarily self, right? So how are you reacting to criticism? Or how are you being defensive? When does that come up? Really noticing and becoming very self-aware of how you participate in the system. And once you start to do that, you'll be surprised on how you can impact and influence the system, right? Because when you become self-aware of how you're showing up in the system, you start to notice how others are showing up in the system.
Awesome. I think I can take like two more here. I thought this was an interesting one. Tina, how does burnout fit into the equation? Is there a risk of fatigue if in a state of prolonged constant learning?
No, because I think we move in and out of that, right? I think we're and this is a longer answer to the question, but when we have certain chemicals, neurotransmitters and hormones in our brains, we all have them. The chemical composition of them is different for each one of us. And when we call it the Goldilocks effect, when our porridge is just right, we are in flow. Okay, and that's when we're engaging our thinking brain and we're learning and we're having insights. When we are not taking care of what we call the 5 core needs of the brain, it puts us into apathy or overwhelm. Okay, so when we're feeling pressured to achieve results that we haven't had a say in, we haven't had the perception of being part of in terms of designing, that might push us into apathy and overwhelm. And what that does is that it starts to engage something called cortisol. which is our stress hormone. We all have it in us, we need it, but when we overproduce cortisol, it starts to cannibalize the things that help us actually think, right? So all the good stuff, serotonin, dopamine, etc. Some of us need a little bit of adrenaline and cortisol to get us into flow. So you have to ask yourself, from a learning perspective, right, and from managing your stress, are you the kind of person that does stuff the night before because that's when you are in flow for the presentation the next day? Or are you the person that needs 2 weeks in advance, right? And it's the same thing for learning. Are you the kind of person that needs to, learn and go an all-nighter the night before the exam or the test? Or are you the person that needs 2 weeks before? And you have to understand about yourself as well as your team and how each person likes to learn, right? And create that environment for them. As a leader of a team, you really have to understand that about yourself and then about your team, because your team might be wanting to provide you with information and getting in feedback for a presentation you might be doing in 2 weeks' time, but you'll only look at it the night before, right? So how are you managing that? And if you are a night before kind of person, make sure you're doing it the night before and not the day of, because that'll push you into overwhelm or apathy. Mm-hmm. So it's really understanding and managing that. And whoever asked that question, I can send you way more information on that. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. I think we're at time now, and I apologize to anyone. We had some great questions come in just due to our time restrictions, can't get to them all, but definitely lots of opportunity to see Tina again. So I just want to thank everyone who registered for this webinar, for joining us today, and a big thank you to Tina for sharing her experience and knowledge with us. I encourage everyone who would like to learn more from Tina to register for her virtual coaching for building growth-minded teams, which starts up in September. And we will send all this information out following along with the slide deck. And if you have any further questions, all of our information is available on our website. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day and I guess lunch now.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.